All right, pre-lighting the cigar, it will happen during the video, I guess. Fifth Q&A. I think there's only going to be one more. This is actually the last of the official questions from the poll, but there are a few that like came up in videos that are pretty good questions to make another Q&A video, so I think there's going to be one more. Anyway, first question from Ben. I don't remember exactly. It's pretty much will dealing make my poker play better? I don't think it will have an effect. For one, I'm barely even like paying attention. Like there are times when I'm playing and I'm like very aware of like a draw that came in, and I'm very aware like that guy would have played the draw that way, and then like his action on the river very much syncs with the fact that like he was chasing that draw and hit it. And I'm like very aware of like what the nuts are. I'm like very aware of like all the draws that missed sometimes, and I'm like much more in tune and like expecting people to turn over certain hands, and they do a lot. Dealing, like there are times there are just like things going on, more so in cash than tournaments, but there are just things going on and I'm not even like aware. Like someone flips over like 2 spades and I look at that hand before I look back at the board. Like, oh, okay, flush. Like there are times when I'm playing, I'm like expecting spades to turn over. I'm very aware spade flush is possible. There are times when I'm dealing when like it takes me a second to like look back and like match the cards with the board, because I'm doing other things. Cash has a ton going on. Tournaments, not as much. Some like the first hand, the first couple, there are like things I'm like cleaning up with the rack. I like some things I just like a certain way. Some things like you need to check that all the seat cards are correct. Like if you don't have seat card number 2, there better not be a player in number 2, otherwise like something wrong happened. You better not have a seat card from another table. Sometimes I'm checking early that like I have the right number of chip stacks in the rack. We usually start with 5 players at a table, 4 open seats. So like if I push into a table an hour in and there are 2 empty seats and 2 chip stacks in the rack, that makes sense. Something else might mean there was a problem along the way. So the first few hands in a tournament table and all the hands in cash tables, I'm just like focused on other things besides, you know, trying to guess like the player's hand. So ultimately, I don't think it'll have much of an effect. Next question. By the way, I left the house at 8:01, which is when it said sunset was today. So yeah, it looks pretty bright through the camera. Not nearly as bright actually out here in this wasteland Mad Max. Where are my sunglasses? Mad Max type of landscape. But second question, forgot who asked, but it was about shifts. Which shift gives you the most hours? Which cash game gives you the most tips? There was a third question somewhere in the middle. I don't know. I have nothing to compare it to in terms of what shift gives you the most hours. I guess it was meant for one job. If you have one job, what gives you the most hours? I've heard people say all of them. Orleans offers for tournament people the 11 a.m., the 4 p.m., the 6 p.m. because those are when tournaments start. For cash people, I know some group shows up at 7 p.m. I think there's a group that shows up at 1 a.m. even though I've never been in the building that late. And there are the morning people. But like for multiple shifts, so I just don't know. For multiple shifts, you need to have one early and one late. Like you're not going to start at 4 p.m. and make it to a second draw. Like what time does your second shift start if you start at 4 p.m. somewhere? Like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., maybe you could pull it off. You're not having a shift before that. Like you're ending somewhere by like 2, 3 p.m. and getting somewhere else by 4. As this plane passes overhead. For 2 shifts, you really need an early one and a late one. There are a few people who are also working MGM. I talked to one of them, asked him a few questions. He said his MGM shift started at 8, so he starts at 11 at Orleans. And when he has 2 shifts on the same day, he starts at MGM at 8. So that's enough time. You get 8 hours. Rarely do they need you to stay longer. Usually say at the beginning of the day at Orleans, like, I need to be out by X o'clock. They know people have 2 jobs and have to get somewhere else. So He says that, and it gives him enough time. I guess he says he needs to be out by like 6 or 7 o'clock. That gives him enough time to get to MGM and start his 8 p.m. shift over there. So for 2 positions, I know a little more, still not much, but you need an early one and a late one. Another part of the question was about cash games. What game gives you the most tips? At Orleans, I would say none of the Omaha 8, just because it takes so long to get the 4 cards to everyone out, and almost every hand goes to the river. The hands just take a while. You don't get a lot of hands in per down. No Limit has a lot of hands that are raised pre and everyone folds, or just like the blinds chop, especially at 1-3. I will say 2-5, it's a pretty lively game over there. A lot of raises, a lot of calls, a lot of multi-way flops, all ins. I will also say, I'm really gonna have to like this because the bugs are starting to attack me. 8-16, it doesn't run every day, and I don't think I've ever seen more than 1 table going, but 8-16, limit hold'em. Those pots are big. Just like multiple people putting in like $8 pre, $8 on the flop. Sometimes there's a raise, $16 each on the turn, $16 each on the river. Like, those pots get big, and because the game is almost all $2 chips, you get a lot of $2 tips. There are some $1 chips in play. You need to make some change for rake and promo purposes. So $1 chips are in people's stack, but 8-16, very consistent. And very consistent tip-wise, and like a lot of big pots. I got a little unlucky dealing those games. I remember one time I dealt it, the push came in very, very late to the table before. So at the table before, I dealt it for like 45 minutes instead of 30, eventually got pushed and barely dealt the 8-16 table. I had like about half of the down left, even like a little less. And another time I opened the table, so it took a while for everyone to get to the table, then I had to give everyone chips, and by the time I actually got to dealing the first hand, there were like 5 minutes left in the down. So didn't deal them a ton, but from what I saw, that's a pretty good game. I'd say 2-5 no limit at Orleans and 8-16 limit. Question about tournament tips. I don't know. I remember saying in a video, like, even if I dealt a final table and saw how much the players leave, I don't know what portion is going to me. I don't even see it. I dealt a final table. I dealt that PLO final table this past week, and they leave their tips when they get paid at the desk. While they're getting paid, while the final 2 players are up at the desk getting paid, I'm closing the table. I'm like throwing out all the garbage and pushing the chairs in and putting the decks in order, and just like making the table ready for the next day. Like, I don't even see what they leave. Even if I saw it, I don't know. I made that video about it, link at the top if I could find it. I get the proportion that I dealt. If there were 325 downs dealt in that tournament and I dealt 9 of them, then I get 9 325ths of all the tips left for that tournament. 9 divided by 325 is the fraction of the downs, the percent of the downs that I dealt. Multiply that by the tips left, and that's the portion of the tips that goes to me. It's proportional based on downs, but I know my downs. I don't know how many downs were in the tournament, and I also never know what they leave, but I get something. My first paycheck had about $100 more than I expected. My second one had about $250, so that's where that extra is coming from mostly. And remember, rice is a spoon food.